Guardian Unlimited.
Is that your girlfriend? Small world.
The Heckle.
I love what you've done for the curtains, love.
The Heckle.
Hello.
Hello, I'm Brian Logan.
And I'm Lucy Porter.
And welcome to the Heckle, coming to you today from the Guardian's teeming techno hub in Edinburgh.
And here with us to talk through week 2 of the festival are the comedians Robin Ince and Richard Herring. Hello, Robin.
Hello.
Hello, Richard.
Hello, how are you doing?
Good.
And we're also joined by the Guardian's Maxi Shalvinska. Bearing up, Maxi?
Indeed, thank you. Or am I meant to say hello?
No, that's good. So on today's bumper half-hour Heckle, we'll look at what happens when comedians turn their hands to theatre.
We'll hear the story of the fringe venue that never was.
We'll come up with our own if.comedy shortlist ahead of the official announcement next week.
And I'll play golf.
Woohoo! But first, late night acts. Life in Edinburgh is a 24-hour experience, and some of the most popular shows happen well after midnight. There's Late and Live, After Hours, Spank, and Maxwell's Full Mooners, to name but 4.
Will you please welcome to the stage the mooniest mooner ever to have mooned at the moon, Andrew Maxwell.
Starts at midnight, runs to very late, it's very boozy. Instead of like a normal comedy gig where people applaud when they really like something, when some shit is going off, people howl.
Yeah. If you've never been to Full Mooners before, as you welcome to the stage, JJ Whitehead!
Late at night, you get that drunken horde. You can get one that's just brilliant, and they get into your rhythm, and they come with you, and the gig goes to a really cool place.
It's good. It's fucking festival. Friday night, festival time. 10 after 2, here you go. You're up late, staring at some guy you've never seen before, yelling at you.
You know, really spontaneous things can happen in the late shows that aren't going to happen in the structured, in our theatrical shows. So it's great. So you get some good moments.
Who gives a shit about watching athletes that are perfectly capable of doing the events they've been training their whole lives for? I don't care, man. Ooh, look at me, I'm fit as fuck and I throw a javelin for miles. I don't give a shit.
Because the fact is, in our shows, the same thing's happening pretty much every night. We might be a little bit flexible and improvise a bit, and so there's some spontaneous moments. But late at night, there's proper moments that everybody will talk about. Like, do you remember that time when such and such pulled his pants down, or whatever?
Tripping over each other, slipping in puke. That's what we want, isn't it?
We've got guys who are almost stylized, who one-liners, guys that tell sort of bawdy tales, guys who are part character. You know, everybody can fucking storm, but you just got to bring it.
Feet, stop your fucking feet! Stop your fucking feet!
I think I just sized up the room, looked at the stage, then went backstage, and the cool thing is, of course, being on a bill with your buddy. I'm good friends with Maxwell. Someone just hung out backstage and loosen up, and by the time if you've been able to loosen up before you go on stage, then you can feel comfortable and at home right away.
People still hear me say Edinburgh for the month, and they go, oh, rains a lot up there. Your country's fucking underwater right now.
You need to live in the moment. You need to be able to release yourself from any shackles of ego or worries of pomposity and just live completely and purely in the moment. You're the joke. You're the joke. You get up on stage, you want to make people laugh, you're the fucking joke. You know?
So, Richard, Robin, have you got experience of these late night bear pits?
Late and Live I've done. I haven't done Full Mooners. In fact, Late and Live, when I was in the Oxford Review in 1988, we were booked to play Late and Live.
This isn't going to end well, is
and
it?
it nearly destroyed my entire... In fact, it's like it hung over my entire career, in fact, actually, that gig. I didn't really understand what Late and Live was, I don't think.
What were you doing, like sketches?
We tried to do sketches, yeah, without microphones. I mean, we were insane. And we got really booed off, but then we had been booked twice, and they were shouting at us for being posh and stuff. And then we'd been booked twice, and we had to come do the second one because they were paying us £10 each. So we came to do the second one and actually did a kind of... I did an awful thing with Ben Moore. Which we were slightly angry. I did an act called Herring and Spaz with Ben Moore, in which Ben was my mentally handicapped younger brother.
And a mere 14 years later, you were script editing Little Britain. But how did it happen, Herring?
But Late and Live used to be unique, didn't it? And it used to have this reputation as uniquely savage. But now it's been diluted a bit because these places are all over the place.
See, I'm not sure, because when I first went there, before I was doing comedy, when I was a teenager and I first went to Late and Live, it was just an interesting evening. Then then started to get this bear pit reputation, and I think now comics feel that they're being, blooded with the tail of a fox by doing it. And because it's got this reputation as well, I think it means that people who go there, they go, yeah, well, we as an audience must therefore behave appallingly. And you think, yes, it's marvellous that they do this in Edinburgh, because, of course, there aren't clubs available the rest of the year that do this for more money. And, I mean, I think Late in Life can have great moments, and I've seen Daniel Kitson do marvellous things there, and Ross Noble, and you will see interesting surprises, but I think maybe it's got too much of a reputation now, and so people go and they think, oh yes, it'll be a horror, and sometimes it's just quite bland as well.
I do Spank, which can be all right.
Spank was actually great. I've normally quite enjoyed doing that. And I think there are... it depends on what kind of drunks you're getting, because you can get the drunks who are what you would call fringe drunks, who actually... They like... It's in much the same way as last year I did a late-night show called Dirty Book Club, which was a version of the show that I do called Book Club, but with ruder books and weirder things. And we got what I would call a kind of drunken librarian and goth crowd, which was great fun to play to. And Spank, when it was first going, that's actually where the book club even came out of, was you could go there and just experiment and do anything you want. You didn't have to go up there and do stand-up. I think a lot of these late-night shows now are just late-night stand-up shows.
I think the book club's an experimental kind of place. Political Animals is a sort of late night one where I did Political Animal early on, and they were just... It's really rare to have a late-night audience that kind of you'd say something clever and they're kind of applauding. They were almost a bit too sort of intellectual, and actually they missed the point of sometimes when you were taking the piss and they were applauding some point you were making and you were actually just about to go on to subvert it. But a very Guardian reading audience. They're probably listening now. Hello.
You do get lots of late night burlesque and cabaret these days. Perhaps the way to really experiment now is for comedians to put on a feather boa and start...
Just the full string of pearls, which I saw is quite... Actually, the burlesque thing is amazing. It's such a boom now, isn't it? But you have to choose your burlesque well, because there are some fantastic, really people who know the whole history of burlesque, and they're also great performers. And then sometimes you just go and see some embarrassed students in their pants. Yes. You think, this doesn't look very much like burlesque to me.
Yes.
Still sounds all right to me.
Naked students looking embarrassed in their pants. If drunken audiences heckling you in the wee small hours is one side of the Edinburgh experience, on the other end of the scale, some comedians are treading the boards in Edinburgh's festival theatres. It's an increasing trend, with comedians like Phil Nichol directing Breaker Morant in Killer Joe, and Rich Hall writing and starring in Best Western.
Stuart Lee has devised Johnson and Boswell, which brings back to life the famous Dr. Johnson, played by Simon Munnery, while Miles Jupp plays his Edinburgh-born biographer and world champion syphilitic Boswell. And we went along to the play and asked the audience what they thought, comedy or theatre.
Ooh, I say it was comedy.
That was a comedy.
Very funny theatre.
I don't see a distinction between the two.
Did it work?
For me it did. I thought it was quite brilliant. I thought it was thought-provoking and it was hilarious and very entertaining.
Hit for me too.
Oh, kind of hitty miss, really. I mean, I'd love the performances, but it was a pile of old crap, really.
We watched it at 10:30. We laughed a lot.
Sunday night. It's work tomorrow, so it was a great atmosphere to send you off into the week, really.
The most shambolic thing I've ever seen in the Trafford.
It was a bit highbrow for me. It's more interesting to have a dramatic concept.
I think a lot of comedians are actually trying to shoehorn a kind of plot into a standard kind of comedy routine, which can seem really forced.
I love the depiction of the storm with the buckets of rubbish being thrown at them.
I'd rather see comedians do this for an hour than stand up and be boring middle-aged men for an hour.
So, comedians being middle-aged men for an hour. Richard, you saw Boswell and Johnson. What did you think?
I think it's really good. And I think it's what the Fringe should be about. It's kind of, it's an experimental, different piece. For me, it's nice to see a theatre thing that is genuinely really funny. And I think theatre people get a bit sniffy about something being funny and think if it's funny, it can't mean anything at the same time. But actually, it makes you think about a lot of different... it's about the notion of celebrity and about the notion of your heroes and about the English-Scottish divide, and there's a lot of themes in it that are very interesting, and the development of characters, and just because it's not done with a Poe face and people crying and having been raped.
Maxie, are you going to leap to the defence of theatre people here? Do you only want to see shows where you cry and see people being raped?
No, absolutely not. I think that there's a lot of fantastically funny theatre on at the Fringe every year. I think that the problem for me is when comics are cast in plays because producers want to flog tickets rather than because they can actually act. I mean, there's a difference between having comic timing when you're delivering your own material and being able to work with somebody else's script. Not everyone can pull that off.
Not everyone can, but I think certainly in this, Miles Jupp and Simon Munnery are incredibly well cast in it. And I agree with you if the people can't act, but then there's a lot of plays with actors who can't act in them.
Yeah.
Someone like Phil Nichol has proven himself to be just a phenomenally talented actor as well as a great comedian. And I think if it's a funny play, a comedian is more likely to get the comedy across, whereas it's actually very difficult, I think, to find actors who will do comedy in the correct way. With The Odd Couple, I think, when they had Bill Bailey and Alan Davis, I think Alan Davis was like really badly miscast in that, and because he was a big name, and he refused to cut his hair and stuff, and so he looked quite shoddy where he was meant to be the kind of neat one.
I once did a comedy play. I'll explain it more, actually. When I say a comedy play, I did a comedy musical with Ted Rogers and Sue Pollard. It was not on the Fringe. And I found interesting in the way that comics approached, because they had some straight acts in it and they had some comedians in it, that the comics were best in the first few rehearsals, because they got stuff immediately and there was an energy there, and a lot of the actors seemed very kind of, dead, there was nothing there. But then as it went on, the actors got it right, and the comics got bored, and so started mucking around, changing lines. And I think sometimes that's one of the hardest things as a comedian to get rid of, is as a stand-up you're used to be able to change things every night, you're your own director, producer, etc. Whereas when you're doing a play, you go, oh, have I got to say this again?
Yeah.
And that kind of easy boredom comes in. So I watched the progression of over 2 weeks. The actors become absolutely excellent, and Freddie Parrot-Face Davis and myself become increasingly foolish.
I put on 4 plays in the 1990s, and they all cost me £10,000 to do, and there's nothing you can do with them afterwards. I mean, I think the attitude now is much better because people take comedians a lot more seriously, but I think the theatre people just went, oh, it's a comedian writing plays, and the comedy people went, oh, it's a comedian writing plays. So you're kind of in this middle ground, and I think I learned a lot by pushing myself into an area that I hadn't done before, and it's good to see people doing it, and I think, especially as you get older, it's nice to try something a bit different, which is Rich Hall and Stu. And
well, it's nice that the Edinburgh Festival is being used for experimentation again, because there was a while where people accused it of just becoming a safe place for stand-ups to go.
And if it was really a place for experimentation, comedians would be doing dance and classical music shows as well.
Yeah.
Maybe I'd just like to mention that tap and opera both appear in the book club. Not by me, though. I'd love to be able to tap dance.
People are complaining that there's too much comedy at the Fringe, and then complaining when comedians start doing plays. It's like, you're not allowed to do...
They mean too many comedians. Leave it well alone.
I think people are very keen to pigeonhole you, whereas a lot of comedians are very clever and very capable of writing a lot more than just a stand-up routine, So I think it's not like because you've been a comedian you're never allowed to write a play.
The proof is in the work in the end.
It is, but I really think there's a genuine thing where a theatre audience... There was a woman saying, I've never seen something so shambolic at the Traverse. There is a snootiness there, and I think theatre people are very suspicious of something that makes them laugh. The fact is, if you go to a regular funny play, you might laugh 4 or 5 times in 2 hours. So if you're laughing 4 times a minute, which I think you do in Boswell and Johnson, it makes it better to get your serious point across through comedy. And also, in these plays, they're very subtly making a point rather than necessarily kind of clubbing people over the head with something. And if people are laughing and learning at the same time, it's a much more effective way of getting something across if people are having a good time.
Still to come in today's massive Heckle.
If.comedy speculation.
Homeless comedians.
And golf. So, Robin, how's your show going?
I always start off slightly psychotic, so I'm happy on Wednesday, then on Thursday I do my show, and it's when you have to get it into an hour. It doesn't matter how many times you attempt to do it in an hour in a preview. It's very different when you're actually just walking straight into that room, doing the hour, and then coming out. And so I then spend a week going, this is not what it was meant to be. It was meant to be an amazing philosophical examination of consciousness and evolution. And there's a man just shouting about bonobos and astronomers who had noses made of gold. And I've never managed to get very good. 2 things that have annoyed me. I spent 3 years trying to write a good routine about Easter Island and about Eratosthenes, who discovered the circumference of the Earth through shadows. And I've never worked it out.
Sounds like comedy gold.
Well, that's Easter Island and Eratosthenes. Honestly, it really is. When you see Carl Sagan talking about it, it's magical. And that's the one thing I'd like, if I can gain anything out of this show. If 12 people who came to the show went and bought a Carl Sagan book, I'd be reasonably happy.
It's a nice modest aim for the festival, isn't
it?
I think it's good to have those sort of, that's the aim of the festival. Is like, for mine, it's just getting people to go and build dens in their homes and stuff like that. So
have you got a similarly homely and lovable aim for your...
I haven't really got any aim other than to just do the show and
pull chicks.
People laugh. Yeah, that'd be nice. Students in their pants embarrassed. It's my bedroom in the morning.
I'm hoping that our conversation about burlesque stays in, because if the burlesque conversation gets cut out,
then students in their pants.
Students in their pants in Rich Sam's bedroom.
But the shows, I'm really enjoying just coming up to Edinburgh and doing something I want to do and actually not caring so much. And it's my 20th anniversary. It's my 16th Fringe, and I think, like you, I used to get really wound up, and I still do very occasionally get a little bit wound up by some stupid thing.
The Heckle!
Next week, nominations will be announced for the If Comedy Awards, formerly known as the Perriers, and we'll see whether the judges have been thinking along the same lines as the reviewers. So our producers, Ben and Fran, have been through the papers.
So Rod Gilbert, now he got a 1-star.
Scotsman Rod Gilbert, 4 stars.
So I see the stage you've given Brendan Burns.
3 weeks in Edinburgh, Brendan Burns. There was no...
Whereas our very own Brian Logan seems to sit on the fence.
The Scotsman, 5 stars.
Paul Sinha. Sister Psycho by Danielle Ward.
Mark Watson, like Mark Watson.
Limmy Show.
Stage, things like
I can't cope anymore!
Well, I'm none the wiser.
The collected wisdom of newspaper comedy critics there.
So to cut a path through the newspaper jungle, we asked Kate Copstick of The Scotsman who she thought might win.
For sure, Michael McIntyre should be in the running, but opinions differ so widely on Michael McIntyre, and so many people think he's too mainstream, which I think is ridiculous. Another comic who I think people don't think about enough because he is seen as a bad boy is Jim Jeffries. His show is phenomenal. It has been for years. It's hugely funny. But because he has a name for being, nasty, he tends to be discounted.
I reckon my grandmother died 4 weeks ago. It's getting on to 5 weeks ago, actually. And she's 93, so I'm all right with it. 'Cause that's what else was she meant to do? Do a motocross race or something? That's what you do, you fucking die. Towards the end, she was just like a head in a chair. And she had dementia, or as I like to call it, honesty. Just old people telling the truth, right? Just fucking, I've walked around this planet for 93 years, I'm sick of lying to cunts, you're not me son!
Funny is funny. Now, whether it's black funny and, sex funny or drugs and rock and roll funny, it's still funny, and he is an awesomely talented comic. Looking back over a few years, there has been a tendency for the panel to fail to nominate or, give somebody the win one year when that person is hot. Chris Addison, I think 4 years ago, did an unbelievably brilliant show. Did not end up on the list. He came back the next year and did a show which was very much the same as the previous years, but not quite as good, and he got on the list. Phil Nichol, 2 years ago when he did Almost Gay, that was a career-topping show, and he didn't make the list. Last year, he came back with Naked Racist, which was fantastic, but it was not as good as Almost Gay, and he won the prize. Last year, Stephen K. Amos was the show that everybody was talking about, how brilliant it was, that he had turned a corner. It was personal, it was funny, it was the best. He didn't make the list. So I'm thinking that maybe we will see Stephen's name up there, and that would be great. That would be well-deserved.
Kate Copstick there, she is a formidable lady. And Brian, do you agree with her opinions?
Extremely seldom, Lucy. And in this instance, really not much at all.
Okay, what do you think then?
Right, a rather more challenging question. Well, I do think that this is quite an unusual year. It's the only one I can remember where there isn't one or two acts who are definitely going to be on the shortlist. I don't think there's any newcomers like Dimitri Martin or Kitson or Jackson's Way that everyone knows have made a big splash and that are bound to be recognised. People are saying, Russell Howard, Michael McIntyre, all of whom are good, capable comics, but the heartbeat is not quickening at the prospect.
Do you have any interest in it?
I don't really like it, but it's partly because I've never ever been nominated for it. But also, I think it sort of spoils the Fringe a bit to have a competition, and it means that a lot of comedians go away feeling they've failed.
But then why don't we as comedians all just decide not to play and just say, actually don't...
I think it's because... it'd be great if that happened. And what I really hope is that Stuart Lee wins the Spirit of the Fringe and goes on and goes, but the Spirit of the Fringe would surely not be to have awards. So, and says, we should all go, let's all leave.
If anyone could lead a revolution, then...
But, then it would be so churlish to do that, because then the thing is, everywhere, it's sort of one of those things where it's like being rich and poor. Poor people put up with rich people because in the back of their mind they think But one day I might be a billionaire, so I'm not going to smash this system down because I might. So, you know, even though most of those people in that room will have no chance of ever getting nominated, they don't want to cause a fuss. And, you know, and I'll be there and I'll be drinking their free cocktails and getting drunk and shouting Perrier every time they say if.com.
Yeah, I think that is
Jam to students, what do your pants look like? I must know.
It must be hard for them to sit in there. There's so many shows. It must be
How can you judge? I mean, that's the thing, isn't it? It's whether you're a critic, a comedian, or a judge. What other time in your existence do you go and watch 7 comedy shows in a row in a day? Because no longer do you need to laugh anyway. You've already had the benefit of the laughter by 2 in the afternoon.
Well, there are lots of acts up here hoping to be spotted and get onto the shortlist, but there are some for whom it seemed the festival was over before it had even begun, when their venue, snappily named Just the Tonic at the Caves, was cancelled 2 weeks before the festival began. Producer Ben Walker went to meet Stephen Carlin, one of the acts who was rehoused, to find out the full story.
Now, if you came to see my show last year when I was at the Café Royal, you may recall that I had the audacity to criticise the quality of the toilets in the Café Royal. Well, this year I've got a venue that's got no toilets whatsoever. Okay, so that is progress as far as I'm concerned, because if you can't have toilets that are acceptable quality, let's have none.
Stephen Carlin, we're standing now outside what was going to be your venue. What happened?
2 weeks before the Fringe was due to start, I got a phone call from the promoter saying, do you know how you're meant to be in the caves? Well, they're not going to be ready in time. We're going to have to build a new venue on the site of the old Gilded Balloon that burnt down, temporary venue using tents and raised artificial platforms and scaffolding. There was a slight moment of panic when I seen the venue at first, because it wasn't ready, even 2 days before the festivals, but it was literally a building site.
So what's it like performing in a tent?
It's good. I mean, the only there's a bit of noise that comes in, but it actually helps me to time the show, because every night, exactly half hour into my show, a street sweeper will go past in the street, and so that is an audio signal for me to know that I've got to be at a certain part of the show at that time.
Thank you very much. Let's go and have a look at the new venue now.
Yep.
So I'm now with Tamsin from the promoters Good Sense of Humour.
Yes.
You guys had quite a hand in turning this into a venue.
Yeah, well, the initial renovation was done by Daryl Martin from Just the Tonic. It's the old Gilded Balloon fire site, so it literally is a building site, although rather a striking one with the old architectural features of the arches at the front still there. So Daryl organised the 2 marquees to basically save all of the shows which were homeless. And then at the last minute we thought it needed a little bit of extra titivation, so we came in and we painted up the walls and we added fairy lights, and then we did a little bit of Banksy style graffiti artwork on the arches. I think it has a certain sort of post-apocalyptic charm, but the fairy lights, you know, bring wonder and magic to any venue, I think.
They set off the apocalypse very well.
Yeah, it's all come together beautifully. Everybody pulled together at the last minute, and we've got a perfectly functional, rather charming little venue here, and you get a very decent cup of coffee, a very good show. You should come and have a look.
Good plug there.
Thank you.
This is the Sissoko Urban Garden. The urban garden bit of it, I don't know what an urban garden is, but I assume that is what an estate agent calls a yard. Yes, it's like a garden, but with no plants and just concrete and bricks. So a yard. And urban garden with development potential is a yard where you could park a caravan.
There have been problems with it being a different venue. Sometimes tickets have been sold and they haven't turned up. Sometimes I've had to direct people, seeing them walking about looking lost and they're looking for me. And there was one member of the box office staff that thought my show was cancelled and actually been turning the public away, which I like, because I like to put a number of obstacles in the audience's way. I don't want to make it too easy for them.
It's pretty impressive. They've 2 venues, a bar serving oysters and all sorts of things.
Exactly, yeah. So do you get oysters at some of the permanent venues? No, at all. And a press office in its own little tent, and the ticket office, which is in a shed that looks like it would be at a pitch and putt where they hand out the clubs. Everyone is pulled together. It's been a real wartime spirit thing. That achievement of building that venue is not equivalent to the 1939-1945 Second World War, but it's maybe a close second.
So how would you have coped with that, fellas?
I don't know, it would have been very, very disappointing. I'd have been very upset about it. And then you just have to make the best of it, don't you? That's the Edinburgh thing. You do have to pull through.
I mean, but so many of the venues are just constructed for the festival, like the room that you're in at the Underbelly. Is that a year-round venue?
I don't know what they do. I don't think the Underbelly does anything in the rest of the
Isn't
other...
it for storage or something?
Yeah.
I thought it just meant that if it rains, a lot of ancient manuscripts get very wet as they're kept in a skip outside until they can be put back in.
Because, I mean, those venues at the Baby Belly are just amazing. They're just like literally these little caves. You go down these winding passages.
Great.
It's just,
you get
it's
dripped
just sort of
on
amazing, though. I mean, that's what's great about Edinburgh. You know, to turn like a cellar into a venue. It's almost, you know, it's so theatrical down there and exciting down there.
It's great for us, but not so great for the bedless tramps.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember doing one venue when I was working as a tech before I became a stand-up, and as it was we were stripping it down, and realised that this was a place it was normally used as a hostel.
Right.
I don't know where they went, and then, you know, as we walked out and the sun came up, it was the end of the Fringe, to queue of people going, "Can we come back now?"
Yeah, but they were staying in your flat now.
Yeah.
There's a lot of site-specific theatre in Edinburgh. You don't think there's any chance of site-specific stand-up comedy taking off?
Well, good. Maybe that's what you just end up doing in your flat. Malcolm Hardy did a show in his flat, didn't he? When he was, and then he wasn't allowed to charge people to come in, so he charged them to leave. So he kind of managed to get around the laws.
As critics, do you find that the venue makes a difference to your reviews? Do you factor it in?
We should maybe have more venue reviews, where, as well as reviewing the show, you then go, it seems quite preposterous to charge someone £12 to come into a room where the comedian's sweating within the first 3 minutes and it's dripping off him and we're all sweating and feeling woozy.
It can be a bit of a litmus test, that, though, actually, because there are all of these absolutely tiny black box theatres. It can be like going to kind of sit in a series of saunas throughout the day. By the time Edinburgh is over, my pores have been well and truly cleaned.
Yeah, your skin is lovely, if I might say so. And now, at last, it's time for the golf.
It's not often you find yourself up at 8 o'clock during the Edinburgh Festival, but here I am, 10 miles out of the city centre, about to start the Comedians versus Critics golf match. I'm paired today with the stand-up Miles Jupp. We're at the first tee, and the grudge match is about to commence. Right, who's it? Is it me?
It's you. Yeah, absolutely.
It was an extremely good start. I'm very pleased. The first tee is a real possibility for self-immolation and humiliation, but I've pulled it off with a frankly spectacular shot. Miles is about to take his shot, leaning over the ball. A lot of pressure. Miles?
Yeah.
Any thoughts on this contest?
I'm not a leading contender. You seem to be hitting it quite straight, quite full. I think probably Brian Logan's aiming for yet another victory.
I think Miles is hustling. Bus ride was a testy affair as comedians and critics sounded one another out cautiously, like wild beasts sniffing each other's bottoms. Had I given anyone an embarrassingly bad review? Had anyone been given an embarrassingly bad review by me?
Well, you're out of bounds.
It's a pointless game this is.
Don't really have time for the sort of over-exuberant celebrations that Mr. Logan's throwing in.
I feel this is a bit like the hare and the tortoise. I've started out the traps with big ears and gay abandon, but Miles on the other side of the fairway is tortoise-like and so far producing the results. So, in your experience of comedians, is there a strong mutual antagonism, or is there any mutual respect whatsoever?
I think comedians and critics come to Edinburgh to do exactly the same thing, which is to sort of make a name for themselves and at some point write or deliver something that's memorable in some way that people might sort of notice and talk about. So they're basically playing the same game, but pretending not to, I suppose. Oh, yeah, that is exactly where we meant it to go.
Right, here we are on the 18th green. We just finished the golf match and I'm very pleased to report that I've shown Miles Jupp who's boss. Miles, how do you feel about your crushing defeat?
I feel beaten. I am beaten. I don't feel good about it, to be honest, but that's alright. I'll live to fight another day.
Do you think in any way today's match has proven something about criticism and its superiority to comedy as an art form?
I don't think it's proved anything whatsoever about anything, but maybe. I'm happy to concede that you're better at golf than me. I mean, you don't do what I do, so you don't know about it. But yeah, you're good at golf.
Gracious in defeat, as indeed he has been all the way around. It's been a pleasure.
So, Maxie, do you ever come up against the people that you've given bad reviews to?
Well, yeah, that's the exception, I think, rather than the rule. More often than not, there are people who will give you sort of strange looks or look away when you walk into a room.
You find yourself being glared at across the bars and pubs.
Yeah.
What about you, Brian? Are you a deeply unpopular man in Edinburgh?
I'm a deeply unpopular man in London as well. That's my own psychodrama. You certainly do bang into them quite a lot in Edinburgh, there's no two ways about that. But I think it's a pretty good discipline when you write reviews of people's shows to never write something that you wouldn't be able to say to their face.
Say to them, yeah, in person.
And Edinburgh puts that to the test. If you think you're doing that and not, then you'll soon find out about it in Edinburgh. And you just have to hope that people are happy to take you at face value and have a talk about it, or tell you to piss off if they don't want to have a talk about it. But, I can handle that if they can.
Yeah, I've never actually punched a critic.
I've slept with one. I went out
That's
with
a
one.
way to punish him. Good God, what terrible
Student
review has she
newspaper?
given you?
No, it's the Observer comedy critic.
How many
I went
stars
out
did you
with-
give her?
How many stars did she give me? Especially, they don't give stars in the Observer.
So no tension between you and the press, then you kind of got
No,
happy to...
I felt like a sort of Romeo and Juliet betrayal of my craft to cross over that boundary.
You've made great comic hay out of the fact that in 2005, was it, the Telegraph
Yes.
critic said you were the worst
I got
comedy
the
show
worst,
it's seen all year.
worst comedy experience of the year, yeah. It was actually quite a compliment at the end of the year. If it happened in Edinburgh, I think it would have actually probably destroyed me. Because it was, I was doing my first stand-up show and, and I can't imagine that a comedy critic could see that show and go, that was the worst thing in the world of comedy that has happened in this entire... And the fact that the guy remembered 6 months later and the fact that it was the Daily Telegraph made it, actually an easier pill to swallow out. And it's the only thing I've ever really won, so, so I didn't want to just sweep under the carpet. I'd won an award.
Well, before I end up getting clobbered by our two guests today, perhaps it's time to move on. That's the end, in any way, of today's extended Heckle, which has been presented by me, Brian Logan.
And by me, Lucy Porter.
Our guests today were Robin Ince, Richard Herring, Maxi Shalvinska, and the production team is Andy Dixon, Pascal Wise and Nell Bowes.
The music's by the Des Moines Riot, and the shows are produced by Ben Walker and Francesca Panetta.
Until Monday, bye-bye.
Guardian Unlimited.